Welcome everyone to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, now accepting residents. Call 360-271-2530 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay. Well, today we have with us Peter Moseley, who has a very exciting project that he's going to tell us a bit about. Peter has built a backyard railroad, and we're really excited to hear about this train story. So, Peter, please take it away.
Okay. Well, my name's Peter Moseley, and I now sort of resident in Barn in this machine shop that you see behind me. And but I'm also involved in all the metal fabrication there. But I got started into this railroad hobby when I was got exposed to it when I was very young. So let me share a screen and sort of tell you my story here. So I used to live in California, and my wife and we had a next door neighbor by the name of Ron Schmidt that moved in 1990. And my father had been a model railroader of sorts. He was all kinds of things. But when you build models of, why does anybody build a model to start with? Very often, if you like trains or planes or stuff, you can't really afford one, but you can build a good model of it. And you have a desire to work with your hands. And there's also involved in model making the artistic eye. Excuse me. And then if you get something that you build and can actually operate, you get the vicarious pleasure of doing that. So trains are one of the many things that you can model. They're ubiquitous. They involve motion. There's a lot of romance around the railroads. And then in my case, there's the disease. And when I was quite young, that's a picture of me at about 7 years old in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, standing in front of model trains, Buddy L model trains that my father had set up in the backyard. And that was kind of how I got infected. And so that led to the Flint Ridge and Portola Valley Railroad, which was a combination of my father's railroad in California. This is my father with a steam engine that he built that was 1 inch to the foot scale. So it's 1/12 size. And you can see there's machinery there in that shop. And I grew up around that machinery, so I was very used to it and enjoyed it. And then when we moved up to California after his death, I ended up with his stuff. And my neighbor and I built this 1 inch to the foot railroad in our backyard. This nice trestle was part of it. And we had about 1,200 feet of track in this scale. And it's hard to see here, but these are, well, you'll see in a minute. You can ride on these trains. They're big enough to ride on. So this is not basement train stuff, but rather backyard stuff. And these particular models were models of standard gauge equipment. And this is my friend Ron, next door neighbor, riding on a battery powered model of a RDC train that was used in commuter service. But Ron's real passion was in Colorado narrow gauge, and Colorado had all kinds of narrow gauge railways there. You can see the list of them here. And they served as the roads up into the mountains for people with sheep and mining and other activities. And that was the only way in and out of the mountains was to ride the trains. And so they were a very important part of the early Colorado railroad history. And because we were interested in this, my two other friends, Bill Bowler and Stan Marshall, showed up, and Stan had wanted to make this locomotive, a model of this locomotive you see in the picture here. And they started this project, and then it languished. And so, but this started to build this locomotive in 2.5 inch to the foot scale. And just to give you an idea, that really amounts to 1/5 size of these trains as they existed. So it's a fairly big model. And in order to make models like that, we went to Colorado and found the prototypes that we wanted to make models of. So this is Denver and Rio Grande 268 on the left, and the Denver and Rio Grande 278. These are C16 class engines that were prominent. They were built in the 1880s, and then they ran up on into the 1950s. And so we further, since there were three of us making these particular style engines as our prototypes, there was a different version of 268 when it had been painted up in these gaudy colors for a World's Fair or train fair in Chicago in the late 40s. So we could actually go and visit these things, and we did. And so we would go and photograph them and take our rulers and our cameras and pencil and paper and make all kinds of detailed sketches of the individual parts of these of the steam engines, but also the trucks and cars and things like that we would want to model. So if you're going to undertake making a model like this, it helps if you have a pretty good workshop, and all three of us did. All four of us did. This was my shop in Portola Valley, and some of this equipment that you see here is now at Barn, and so people often ask, well, how long did it take? This is a lathe that's at Barn. This is a milling machine, CNC milling machine at Barn, and we started this in 1996, I guess. And when we did that, we said we'll be done in 2 years. And we said we'd be done in 2 years every year for the last 10 or 15. You just never finish. But it took us 8 years to get the very first one of these engines up and running. But here's some of the stuff that was needed to actually make it. This is a connecting rod being milled on the CNC milling machine. This is a reversing link. These are little parts for allowing the steam to come out of the cylinder, so-called cylinder cocks. And these are the valves that control the steam flow in and out of the pistons. And more parts. We made our own boilers. We machined special little fittings. We turned wheels on the lathe. And we started to put the parts together, and finally we had something we could at least sit on and imagine that it was running, and put jacketing on the boilers. And this is the plumbing for the steam that comes when you open the valve. It comes out of here and goes down and goes into the cylinders and makes the engine run. And you think you're done when you're about this point, but you got a lot more to do. There's all this plumbing that will take the steam and route it around to injectors into the valves and sight glass and pressure gauge and so forth. But finally, the great day arrives, and we were able to put a propane torch in the back end of this locomotive, and it's up on rollers that you could just barely see here. But then we opened the throttle, and lo and behold, it did work. So that was a very exciting day, of course. And so we ended up with these three engines. This is 268, which is the engine that I was modeling. And there are detailed differences on all these, but the structure is the same. And this is 278, which was Ron Schmidt's favorite and the one he had. And then my friend Bill Bowler made the gaudy one. And he gets all the attention when we take these things to meet, because it's just like the pretty girl coming in the room. This is the fancy one. But they all operate essentially the same. And here's a picture of them running sitting in the roundhouse that we built in my backyard. But those are all to scale, and the track is 7.5 inch between the rails there. And if you do the arithmetic on 2.5 inch scale, that turned out to be 3 feet in the prototype. And so these narrow gauge locomotives were 3 feet between the rails, and our model railroad was 7.5 inches between the rails. So then while we're building the engines, we also needed to have a place to run the track. So we built bridges and road beds and a way around the side of my house, and parts for a turntable, and more bridges here, trestles. And this is pulling a turntable across one of the the trestles we had built. This is a picture of the roundhouse under construction. And here's each of the two turntables, one in my yard and one in my next door neighbor's yard. But since this was taking so long, my neighbor got antsy and he went and bought these 3 engines from other people who had made them. A good friend of mine and my father's had made this engine number 10, and the fellow Richard Hewlin in Colorado made these 2 scale engines, which this is quite large because it's a model of a large engine. And it's lots of fun to run. And that's me standing beside the Shay, which was the logging engine that Richard Hewlin built for Ron. And then this is that larger engine I was showing you earlier, and this is a thing called the Goose, which was a gasoline-powered engine that the railroads used in the 30s when they couldn't shut down, but they didn't want to run their steam engines because they didn't have enough business and it was too expensive. So while we were building all this backyard stuff, we were also continuing to make parts. These are what it takes to make a truck, all the different components, and that's one of a pair underneath every car and every train car. And this is what Stan Marshall's engine looked like. The frame is very similar, but all kinds of details are different. So this was a big divergence from the other 3. And that engine got finished up quite a bit later. And Stan, in fact, didn't finish it. He got too elderly to do it, and it's now passed into other hands down in Fresno. And we made a lot of rolling stock. So there's a box car that we had. There's a derrick and a flat car and a CNS caboose. And this is Ron making frames for tenders. And so meanwhile, as we built the backyard track, we took out the 1-inch scale railroad and put that engine of my father's down in a museum that I had in the little basement of our house. And these are the smaller cars that were associated with that. And then we built some elaborate models of bridges. This is a model of the bridge that goes over the, well, I'm going to forget it, one of the rivers just outside of Durango, Colorado, and the Hermosa Bridge. And so Ron made a scale model of that, and it's all made out of wood, but when you scale it down, it's actually proportionally stronger than the prototype. So this is a very strong bridge. And there's an example of a train up on that bridge. And here's the roundhouse with the doors shut and a guest engine being parked in there. And then what we wanted to do, in addition to running these things in our backyard, I'd like to take them to other railroads. So we had a way of running the trains down this track and onto this lift table, which would allow us to slide it back and forth, right and left and up and down. So we could line it up with tracks that were built into the back of a pickup truck and roll the engine and tender in there and strap them down, and then fill a trailer full of the cars, and off we'd go to various railroads around the West Coast, in particular Joshua Tree and Southern down in Joshua Tree. And this was a very nice mountainous scenic railroad. It's in the desert, but it still feels like you're in Colorado with all the grades and hoops and loops and whatnot that are involved in that railroad. It's a lot of fun to go there. We only did almost every year for about 15 years. Haven't been there for quite a while now, though. And then we went up to Train Mountain in Chillicothe, Oregon. And this is the world's largest 7.5-inch gauge railroad. It has over 35 miles of track. And you take your lunch and you take a lot of coal and a lot of water and you take off and you run, and you can be gone for 4 hours just getting your way around this railroad, maybe more. And so they have an annual, every 3 years they have what they call the triennial, and this is a thing where people from all over the world come to run their trains there. So you can see that we aren't the only crazies doing this sort of stuff. The narrow gauge community portion of this is smaller than the group that does the the standard gauge. And of course, in this day and age, a lot of the engines and stuff are diesel models of diesels that run on either electricity or gasoline. But they show up in very large numbers, and it's a great big week-long event. And the next one is going to be next June in Chiloquin. And then there's a railroad near me where we used to live, in the Golden Gate Live steamers. This was one of our engines on display there. And then nearby where we were living is the Portola Valley and Alpine Railroad. And this has about 2 miles of track now. It's a very wonderful railroad, and I've worked a lot on that one. Excuse me. And in fact, just a few months or so ago, I was down there celebrating a large expansion that we've been working on for quite a few years. So it's a great place to run. And then in the Northwest up here, you've got the Kitsap Live Steamers and the Northwest Railroad in Skykomish and the Mount Rainier Railroad in Molalla, Oregon, and several others. So there's a lot of these railroads around. But Kitsap, if you haven't been there, is an entertaining but quite a flat track. It doesn't have a lot of dynamic ups and downs and tunnels and stuff. And so that's a nice photograph, professional photograph that a friend of mine took of our trains in our backyard. And then just to wrap up here, there is a brief video of our stuff in operation. And so back to that's really the end of all my talk. And I had a lot more material, but I skipped it out of here because it's too detailed and boring. But anyway, that's what I've got to say about the Front Ridge in Portola Valley. Oh, one more thing, of course. Where is it? Well, it's gone now. When we moved up here, we had to take it out. And my friend Ron got Parkinson's disease, so he couldn't manage it anymore. And so it came out of his yard as well. And our equipment has been dispersed around the various friends and people who are interested in it. And so that railroad that you saw there is now gone, but it provided 25 years of an entertainment to a couple of old guys. Well, we weren't as old when we started, but anyway, we got old while we did it. So anyway, it's gone, but then the Portola Valley and Alpine is still nearby. And I had an engine up there for a while, but it's now in another fellow's hands. So, any questions?
Where's the Kitsap one?
It's down in Port Orchard. It's in a park in Port Orchard. If you Google Kitsap Live Steamers, it will come up, and they will have directions for how to get there. And I think there are people there well, I'm not sure their schedule, but look, you'll see it on the web.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, thank you so much. I'm just blown away by what you and your friends were able to accomplish. I mean, this is just amazing. Very cool. Other questions for Peter?
How long did it take, for example, to put one of those engines together?
Well, we were building 3 at the same time. 4 of them at the same time. So one person was working on wheels, someone's working frames, on connecting rods, and so forth. Work got spread around among us. But then as we focused on what turned out to be my engine, oh, thank you. I stopped the screen sharing. Good. Oops. It took that first engine didn't run until 8 years after we had started. And there were various milestones along the way, and we were building track, and we were doing other things with our lives besides, 16-hour days in the shop. So anyway, that's about what it takes. And we've talked to other people, and that's fairly typical, although the guy from whom Ron purchased those 2 bigger locomotives, the Shea and that K27, He did those in about 3 years, but he literally was in his shop 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Luckily, his wife was alongside helping him rather than complaining, so he was able to get it done. But he was trying to make a living out of making those locomotives, and he was an artist. And I thought my friend Ron basically was supporting the arts and buying these engines from him.
Wow.
But it's a lot of parts, and I'm still fiddling around with train-related stuff at Barn. And another friend and I have a particular car that we're building. It's called a flanger, and it's a special kind of snow plow that goes behind an engine. And so I do have a picture of it, but I won't bother. Anyway, working on that at Barn.
So you're ready for the snow.
Oh, we'll
Or
be,
you will be ready for the snow.
Yeah, and now this is another one of those things. We started this project 6 years ago, and we got a long way to go. But of course, I've been putting in just a few hours occasionally. Barn seems to suck up all my time.
I recall, Peter, when you're talking about the different parts and so on and so forth, and you talked about the trucks, and I thought, I remember that. I got educated well.
Yeah.
At least in terminology. Certainly they weren't that big. They were the smaller double. It wasn't the Lionel side, obviously. He wouldn't be caught dead with a Lionel, my father, but he was doing the smaller ones. Double O?
Well, there's HO.
HO. It was HO.
Yeah.
And yeah. And he so I actually was able to be down there with him on occasion, and it was really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I just shared in the chat the website for the Kitsap Little Steamers. I've been able to go a few times actually, and it's a lot of fun. Like Peter was saying, a flatter terrain, but still a fun little adventure. Other questions for Peter?
I have one. It's Christina. I'm wondering if this hobby is starting now to change more to electric and stuff. If you're seeing that change, or are they still sticking with diesel and coal and things?
Well, there's several answers to that. Generally, the people who want to pull larger trains, well, no, that's not true. There are a fair number of electric ones around, battery powered, but they don't generally pull heavy loads because they're going to run out of battery juice too soon. Ours were coal fired originally, and so we could carry enough coal and keep shoveling it in, which you did pretty regularly, and go for fairly long periods of time. You needed to make up water all the time though, because water, with each puff of steam, you lost that water. It wasn't condensed. But so many of them are run on gasoline powered engines. There's a V-shaped engine that just fits in a 1.5 inch scale. A 1.5 inch scale model diesel locomotive. And people, you have to have grown up with a steam engine around to sort of want to make a model of one, and not very many people, we're all of us who did that are aging out. So there's not as much emphasis on the steam engines now. And if you do want to run one at Train Mountain, it has to run on propane. If they've had fire ash come out and catch trees, trees on fire. So they've insisted now that they be propane. It turns out it's easier to run a propane fired engine because you turn a knob instead of shoveling coal.
And you don't have to pull in the coal all the time either.
Yeah, that's right. But there's a lot of romance putting on your dirty old gloves and getting your face all full of smoke. So it's fun.
Thank you, Christina.
I think the other thing is that, the hobby seems to be stable. That is, we have enough younger people coming into it as we're going out of it. Every generation I've been around said, oh, we're going to be the last ones. And my generation thinks that too, but it isn't my observation. The other kids, younger people, when they have the right time, this is not a young, well, anyway, it's a stable hobby.
I remember one of the things that we did, and it has been going that long, and here I'm 84, so it would have been when I was 8 or 9 when I started in on this. My father taking me to Hoboken to the railroad show, model railroad show, and we go every Christmas. We go,
yeah.
take me over to New York City, and but on the way, we had to stop at Hoboken at
Of
the model
course.
railroad show. And it was, I remember it being amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, that's where they would switch to the electrics to pull the trains under the tunnels into Manhattan. Because the old steam engines came there and they couldn't go in the tunnel. So they would switch and go to the electric trains to pull them through.
Great.
Thank you, Peter, so much. This has been fun.
Well, it is fun. Thank you.
I am so, like I said, just blown away. And I'm really glad to hear that it sounds like the enthusiasm continues. I was going to say, I have a 5-year-old son, and he absolutely loves trains. He's going to be delighted to watch this presentation. And I was going to say, if, you know, Thomas the Train Engine is any indicator of whether the love of trains continues, I think it certainly is. So yeah, very, very cool.
I just put up in the chat the link to our website. It's kind of moribund, but it's still there. And at that website is a full, well, much longer video of our backyard railroad that under the, I'd forgotten what the tab is, but your son might enjoy seeing that.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
And it's got pictures of all the different cars and a lot more, you know, a lot more images than I showed in this talk.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I will save that one and share. And I was going to say too, my father, who grew up with a railroad track in his backyard, I think would equally be as delighted to get to watch this presentation.
Where was that? Where was that track?
Dilworth, Minnesota. So just outside of Fargo.
Yeah.
Big railroad town. So
was it Burlington Northern that would come through there?
Sorry, what was that, Sheila?
Burlington Northern would come through there probably. Huh?
Yep. I believe that's it. Yeah, my siblings and I all have a fondness of visiting my grandparents' home and just hearing the train whistle all night long. It was pretty very fond memories. So oh, sorry, did we have another question? Okay, I was just going to ask Peter, so, you know, somebody who is interested in maybe creating a train, getting involved in some way, do you have any recommendations of where they could start?
Well, if they're local here, probably the Kitsap Live Steamers. There are modelers who hang out down there, but if they're interested, also bring them to the barn and I'll show them around a little bit and can talk to them about it. You do the hobby like this kind of end up being influenced a lot by some mentor or some experience that you can directly have. It's not exactly an intellectual exercise, it's a hands-on exercise. So you need to find a way to get your hands on it.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Kitsap Live Steamers or potentially reaching out to you through Barn if you're available to.
There are also, they are, but there must be model railroad clubs around here that have indoor track layouts. I'm relatively new to this area and I don't know where they might be, but I can't imagine there aren't some. I haven't looked, but that's another place to look. And then there are also backyard garden railways that are slightly larger scale, but nowhere near riding. They're just a little bit bigger than your typical indoor layout. And this is not a great place for that because it's too wet in your backyard most of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I imagine California was probably a little better climate for having a backyard railroad. Any other questions for Peter before we let him go?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has been really delightful. I'm really excited to check out the website and see more footage and more examples. Just really, yeah, really incredible what you've managed to achieve, and just what a fun presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie.